السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا
الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا مباركا نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره. اللهم اهدنا فلا هادي إلا أنت، ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى أصحابه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم إنا نستعين بك وندعوك ونستجير بك ونبتهل إليك أن تقسم لنا يا الله من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها يا الله. Of course, we are now in the countdown to Ramadan. So inshallah, by next Jum'ah, we would have already begun the month of Ramadan. And as I noted for a number of years now, every Ramadan is an occasion for the Ummah to pause and to take hold and to think of the past year and how that year compares to the years before it, and to think of the coming year and the challenges ahead, and what must be achieved and what must be accomplished. Of course, it is interesting that as the month of Ramadan prepares to begin, and as we approach the month of Ramadan, the United Nations, acting through the offices of its Human Rights Council, discusses a resolution that would be presented in the General Assembly, condemning Islamophobia as a particularized menace to tolerance and to world peace. The UN Special Rapporteur on Religious Freedoms noted in her report with great alarm the explosion of Islamophobia in the world that we live in. And in the report that she prepared, submitted to the Human Rights Council, a report that, of course, becomes part of the preparatory work by the General Assembly to condemn Islamophobia. The UN Special Rapporteur on Religious Freedoms noted that Islamophobia, something that we obviously would all know, that Islamophobia has reached proportions out of all control, and that it is one of the main threats to international peace in the world. Now, the United Nations, discussing Islamophobia and bringing attention to the problem of Islamophobia, and indeed adopting a resolution condemning Islamophobia or designating a day for the condemnation of Islamophobia, it's a dual-edged thing. On the one hand, one is inclined to welcome any recognition by any international body, in fact, by any civil body whatsoever, that Islamophobia is a particularized form of religious bigotry and racial hatred, that Islamophobia does not respond to rational discourse, and Islamophobia is not a rational category that can be engaged, but like all forms of pathological hate, is beyond rationalism, that like racism, like forms of phobias and bigotry, it is fundamentally and irreconcilably irrational, that it is built on assumptions that defy engagement and defy rebuttal because they are fundamentally irrational assumptions. On the other hand, however, it is very easy to imagine, especially for Muslim countries to imagine, that by putting in all this energy in the United Nations to get a resolution condemning Islamophobia, that they have in fact accomplished or effectuated a solution to this endemic worldwide problem. In fact, it is rather interesting that at the same time that we are having these discussions in the United Nations about Islamophobia, I noticed a report that came out recently The report is titled Islamophobia in the Digital Age, a study of anti-Muslim tweets by Omar Butler. The report is rather limited in its range, limited in its coverage, limited in its methodology, but at the same time, it is remarkably telling and also remarkably alarming. The report simply studies the use of Twitter to spread Islamophobic messages. That's all the report covers. The use of this one social media venue to spread hashtags or other forms of consistent tweets that carry consistent anti-Islamic or anti-Muslim messages. The messages that this report designates as Islamophobic are genuinely shocking, genuinely horrific. So it did not focus on tweets that philosophize about organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood or about Islamism or about, indeed, political Islam, but it focused on tweets that are indisputably Islamophobic. I'm going to read samples of what the report considered to be Islamophobic tweets that it chose to focus on. So, for instance, samples of these tweets say, "It's not stupidity and arrogance, it's terrorism and the jihadism of Indian Shuslims. F the pig religion." Of course, the pig religion is Islam. Another tweet, "Muslim people can't be classified as human beings. They are not more than animals. Even animals are better because they always separate between terrorism and their religion. However, they are both two-sided similar coins." Another tweet, "These Islamists treat children as either cannon fodder or food for pedophiles. They do not value children or females. Adult males have no ethics, morals, compassion, honor, or love. They are inferior. Hashtag reform needed. Hashtag crush globalism. Hashtag dissolve the UN. Hashtag exit EU. Hashtag defend democracy." Another tweet, "Islamists are hiding as liberals in India because of being in minority. God forbid, I guess, the day they even become 1/4 of majority. They will wreak havoc in India that no democracy can endure. But thanks to hashtag Tabligh Jama'at support, their real face is exposed now." Another tweet, "I'm talking about love jihad, where somebody hides, fakes their identity to lure girls into love and later convert them, and also instances of taking them to Syria to sell them as sex slaves. Even Mughals used to have sex slaves. Legacy continued now." Another tweet, "There are forces active across the country that are targeting susceptible and vulnerable Hindu women, luring and brainwashing and forcibly converting them to Islam in a systematic, planned manner. Hindus must wake up to the perils of love jihad. Hashtag love jihad kills." Some of these tweets have very obscene language that I can't read in a khutbah. But, okay, other examples that doesn't have obscenities. "I'm not surprised Representative Ilham Omar is a whorish slut. What else would you expect from a woman who is a Sharia-loving Muslim and a Democrat? Another tweet. Disgusting, clueless girls. They follow Rashida, they mean Rashida, and the jihad squads Omar who hate the host country that took them in. Love it or leave it. They should go find husbands in Syria and lose their citizenship. Another couple of examples. We need to ban halal slaughter and also ban mosques in our country. Mosques are the breeding ground for terrorists and hatred towards Christians. Halal slaughter belongs in the Dark Ages. Final example that I'll read, although there are many. Government will never ban halal as they would lose the Muslim vote. Zakat tax on halal meat is funding Islamic mosques and schools in the UK, essentially. The taxpayer is paying for an archaic culture to be embedded here. Brilliant idea, Pufin, regarding taking children to slaughterhouses. Now, the most interesting thing, and as we get ready to meet Ramadan, the thing that deserves pause and reflection, several things. One is that Twitter consistently and systematically, in more than 85%, refused to remove tweets that are Islamophobic. That only in 15% of the time, upon alerting Twitter that the material is inciting hatred and intolerance, only 15% of the time did Twitter remove tweets. And in these 15% of the time, it was mostly with tweets that used excessive or extreme obscenities to express its point of view. But another significant element is that, as the report notes, that 85% of the negative tweets, so 85% of the anti-Islamic, Islamophobic propaganda is generated by 4 major countries. Ranked number 1 in the world in terms of Islamophobic tweets is India. India has become a central hub for the generation of Islamophobia, not just in India, but indeed Hindu nationalist organizations spend considerable amount of resources in propagating Islamophobia in the United States, Canada, and the UK. What makes Indian Islamophobia so effective around the world is nothing magical or nothing that has to do with a colonial legacy or nothing that has to do with a history of imperialism in the past century. It is quite simply and quite bluntly wealthy Hindus that are willing and are committed to spending millions of dollars to malign Islam and slander Muslims, not just in India, but in the UK, US, and Canada. Second in rank after India is the United States. The vast majority of Islamophobic messages are generated by the same political organizations that invented Islamophobia in the first place. The same organizations with the same known figures of old, like Daniel Pipes, Stephen Emerson, etc., etc., etc. After the United States is the UK, and after the UK is Canada. India, the United States, the UK, and Canada are responsible for about 85% of bigoted messages against Islam on Twitter. But in many ways, what the report doesn't say is even more interesting than what the report does say. One, you notice from a color-coded map that the report includes. Of course, when you look at the original, the colors are obvious. This is just black and white. But it is clear from the color-coded map that the report produces that Islamophobia is a worldwide phenomenon. That Islamophobia is a reality in countries like Russia, China, Japan, Singapore, Australia, most South American countries. In fact, with the exception of South Africa and Nigeria, the only region in the world that doesn't seem to generate a great deal of Islamophobic tweets are African countries, with the exception of South Africa and Nigeria. It is not an exaggeration that as the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion, the UN Special Rapporteur, noted that Islamophobia has truly become a global phenomenon. That the spread of pathological hatred towards Islam and Muslims has spread to the entire world. Another point that the report does not say, but that is extremely significant. I'm going to share with you what the report does say are the top 10 countries in generating Islamophobic content. We already mentioned India number 1, the US number 2, the UK number 3, Canada number 4. Number 5 is Nigeria, a country with a sizable Muslim population. Number 6 is Australia. Number 7 is Pakistan, a Muslim country. Number 8 is the United Arab Emirates, another Muslim country. Number 9 is Germany, and number 10 is Israel. Pause and reflect. Nigeria and the United Arab Emirates generate more Islamophobic tweets than either Israel or Germany. Now, what is interesting about this report, it doesn't seem to account for population percentages. In other words, Nigeria is far more populated than the United Arab Emirates. Germany's population is far bigger than the United Arab Emirates. So when a country as small as the United Arab Emirates generates more Islamophobic tweets than either Germany or Israel, that deserves a considerable pause. But the third point to note is that involvement of Muslim countries in generating Islamophobic content doesn't stop there. If you study the report carefully, you discover some truly alarming facts. Indonesia and Malaysia can generate a considerable amount of Islamophobic content. Saudi Arabia, with a far smaller population than France, Saudi Arabia and France generate the same amount of Islamophobic content. In fact, Saudi Arabia generates more Islamophobic content than either Egypt or Iran. And Saudi Arabia generates more Islamophobic content than Spain, for instance. It generates the same amount of Islamophobic content as Italy, or as I mentioned, France. Other Muslim countries that generate a considerable amount of Islamophobic content is Egypt. Egypt generates less than what Saudi Arabia generates, but Egypt is still one of the countries responsible for generating Islamophobic content on Twitter. This reminds me of an article that I read a while ago, and I mentioned in a khutbah some time ago. The article was titled, "Arab Regimes Are the World's Most Powerful Islamophobes." The article was from 2019. And the article noted back then with some amazement that some of the most prominent Islamophobic organizations receive funding from the United Arab Emirates and from Saudi Arabia. And that some of the Islamophobic content that is generated in countries like Egypt and the United Arab Emirates is indistinguishable from Islamophobic material that you find generated in countries like Italy and Spain and Germany. Now, we must pause and reflect Not only is Islamophobia a worldwide phenomenon, but it is clear, it is now beyond dispute. Beyond dispute, it is undeniable, except by those who are intent on remaining blind and oblivious. But it is undeniable that Muslims themselves play a considerable role in generating and disseminating Islamophobic content. And that countries like Pakistan, like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like Egypt, play a very prominent role in the production and maintenance of Islamophobic discourses. Now, this points to an irony, a paradox, and a deep-seated hypocrisy about the UN resolution. The same countries that are sponsoring the UN resolution are countries that themselves are responsible for keeping the Islamophobic industry alive and active. Countries like the United States, ranking second to India, at least in the realm of tweets, but I can tell you that also in the realm of publications, Islamophobic publications, the United States is second to none. So this resolution is to be sponsored by countries like the United States. But countries like Egypt, like Saudi, like the United Arab Emirates, that are on the one hand saying it is intolerant to speak about Islam in such a demeaning fashion, but you turn around and you are well aware that countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Egypt are authoritarian, despotic countries, that no one would be allowed to generate content on a medium like Twitter if the government doesn't want to allow you. Try to generate content that is critical of Sisi in Egypt. Try to generate content that is critical or even not just simply not flattering towards MBS in Saudi Arabia. The same with the United Arab Emirates. You would be snuffed out and silenced in an instant. The evidence clearly points out that a lot of this Islamophobic content is not spontaneously generated by civil society, if civil society exists at all in these countries, but that those who generate Islamophobic content are part of what in Arabic they call as zubab al-electroni, or these artificial, government-directed, government-invested pods that act upon the orders of these despotic states to influence world opinion in one way or the other. The paradox doesn't stop there about this resolution. But this resolution that is supposed to condemn Islamophobia is also joined by countries like China, a country that is directly responsible for a genocide against Muslims. What is fascinating, though, is that while China is responsible for a full-scale genocide against Muslims, the Chinese state itself doesn't allow or doesn't sponsor the generation of a lot of Islamophobic content. In fact, as populous as China is, on the medium of Twitter, it produces less Islamophobic content than Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, or Egypt. There's one obvious point, that we live in the modern world in a world of illusions and mirrors. But that's an obvious point. And we all know that none of the social media forums are either spontaneous or authentically expressing anything that is self-produced and self-motivated. But the real point is to ask oneself, why? Why are countries like Pakistan, like Saudi Arabia, like the Emirates, like Egypt, part of the Islamophobic industry? Why do these countries, although on the one hand they try to embody and represent Islam and will go to certain conferences and speak as Muslim states, and in the UN will often join the Muslim bloc and make eloquent speeches about Islamophobia in the United Nations, only to turn around and invest resources in propagating and spreading Islamophobia? Begs the question, why do we see countries like Nigeria produce such a heavy Islamophobic content? Or Saudi Arabia, or the Emirates, or Egypt, or Pakistan? What is common and what we always go back to time and time again is looking at the political interests being served by certain discourses. That is just simple intelligence. It's simple for the critical engager of any flow of data or information is to say what interests are being served. Yes, there is a possibility that the folks in the Emirates or the folks in Egypt have lost their faith and are no longer Muslim. That, however, doesn't explain why these governments are still keen that acting in a place like the United Nations sponsor these resolutions condemning Islamophobia. What is common and what is a consistent problem is again an all too obvious point, and yet a point that so many Muslims want to spend their Ramadans, want to live their lives, and not pay any attention to, is that these are despotic countries. These are tyrannical states. These are states marked by deep-seated inequities and deep-seated injustices. These are countries in which the rule of law are absent, and the rule of justice is a mirage. And what all these countries fear is an Islam that would hold them accountable for their injustices and for their immorality. This is the undeniable fact. Saudi Arabia just registered record profits through Aramco, over $160 billion. The ruler of Saudi Arabia, if you talk to any members of the Saudi opposition, now scattered all around the world, will tell you that he is spending this money irresponsibly and that he is driving Saudi Arabia to the ground. Profits of over $160 billion. And what does Saudi Arabia choose to do? Following that insane vision of 2030 and the NEOM project and the new Kaaba, the so-called Al-Muka'ab, the cube in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia immediately signs a contract with Boeing to buy a new fleet of planes. Why? So that they can fly people from all around the world to come visit NEOM and come visit the Muka'ab in Riyadh. Or that's the plan. Meanwhile, as some of you might have heard, literally, as I'm talking to you, the Rohingyas starve to death. Human trafficking among Rohingya camps in Bangladesh is out of all control. If you are in the camps in Bangladesh, you don't know if you're going to wake up, find your child next to you. Because there's a very good chance that your child, especially girls, will be abducted and disappeared, and they will be sold into sexual slavery. And I can tell you that people that specialize in trying to help parents track their trafficked children, what these investigators, many of them ex-military, do is they watch porn sites, illegal porn sites, underground porn sites that rape and abuse children. And the reason that they watch these porn sites is that they're hoping to see the girl that has been abducted from a Rohingya camp. The same, by the way, for Syrian girls. You will hear these little girls scream as they're being raped in Arabic. begging Allah to help them. That's the reality. That's the truth. So as we sponsor a resolution condemning Islamophobia, you might have heard that a fire broke out that killed hundreds in the Rohingya camps. The fire now is believed to have been intentionally set. Does Saudi Arabia use even a small portion of its profits to help the Rohingyas? No. At the same time that we are sponsoring the resolution, the United Arab Emirates rounded up Afghanis without explanation in the United Arab Emirates and is sending them back to the Taliban in Afghanistan. The roundup of Uyghur Muslims continues in countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Emirates. It is well known among Uyghur populations that the only safe place to be are in the same Western countries that generate all the Islamophobic content, i.e. the US, UK, and Canada. But that's precisely the point. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Egypt know very well that they can hegemonically, completely and thoroughly control secular civil critics. They know very well that these secular critics have no cachet, no mobilization powers in the streets of Egypt or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. So they don't care about these critics. But they know very well that the real risk to the logic of despotism, the logic of tyranny, the real risk to the inequities in society, the injustices in society, is a lively, moral, ethical Islam. Is an Islam that looks at justice, that demands justice, an Islam that demands human rights, an Islam that says, who said that a ruler, based on their own will or whim, gets to decide how the entire treasury of a country is spent? And so, we live in an age, as the article back in 2019 pointed out, in which, in the past, the way the same rulers manifested their Islamophobia without ever telling the populace that Islamophobia has become anchored in the heart, was to serve their colonial masters. In our day and age, that's old-fashioned, with the exception perhaps of the comical visit that Trump paid to Saudi Arabia, where Trump told the king, "You must pay." a throwback to colonial imagery and colonial dynamics. But other than that, now states sponsor resolutions condemning Islamophobia while othering Islamophobia. In other words, before their people, Islamophobia is something that other people do. But at the same moment, expending an enormous amount of resources on mediums like Twitter, bolstering, supporting, underscoring, emphasizing Islamophobic messages, so that any Muslim that shows up talking principles, talking ideals, speaking about justice, would immediately become suspect. Because how can you be moral if your prophet himself is accused of immorality? How can we believe anything a Muslim can possibly say about justice if Islam is complicit with slavery? If Islam itself supports an unjust institution like slavery, you've immediately undercut and delegitimated any voice for a moral, ethical, just Islam. If your prophet is suspect, your Quran is suspect, your civilization is suspect, then you have no grounds to stand on. That's the real Islamophobia. That's the real issue. That's what we need to think about as we get ready to live through another Ramadan in our lives. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم واسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. That's the nature of tyranny. When there is no civil society that actually mirrors the thought, the discursive, open-ended thought dynamics of society. In other words, when there is no serious intellectual content being produced, because these entire countries are marginalized, and the only central thing in the lives of these countries is the ruler. The over 100 million Egyptians are inconsequential. They are neither here nor there. They simply do not matter. All that matters is the little clique of people around the ruler of Egypt. Same for Saudi Arabia. Same for the Emirat. Same for every other Muslim country that is anchored in a culture of despotism. Literally, everyone except the elite surrounding the ruler is disposable. They don't matter. As far as the ruler is concerned, take away 1 million, take away 2 million, take away 3 million, take away the entire population. It doesn't matter, because they don't matter. People don't matter. And in order for this extreme lack of logic to survive, when you think about it, it is entirely offensively illogical to have a reality where a small clique of people are the center of the universe, and the millions that constitute the population with all their degrees and PhDs and doctorates and whatever are simply margins. They don't matter. It is so illogical and so extremely illogical that the only way you can sustain it and maintain it is to preemptively delegitimate possible voices of conscience and morality. But these folks know very well that you cannot delegitimate possible voices of conscience or morality unless you undercut the very foundations that such people would stand on. What, Islam wants justice? What are you talking about? Islam never cared about justice. Islam wants fairness and liberation of women? What are you talking about? Your prophet was XYZ. What are you talking about? Islam is fine with slavery. What are you talking about? Your Sharia is the embodiment of immorality. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? So you've managed to neutralize and marginalize not just the entire populations of Muslims, but to do so to morality itself, to ethics itself. So much so that Muslims can live through their entire Ramadan oblivious to what all the world knows, the entire world knows. What's happening to the Uyghurs, what's happening to Muslims in India, what's happening to the Rohingyas, what the entire world knows. That the percentage of trafficked women and children who are Muslim have reached unprecedented levels in the world. It used to be that among trafficked people, you would occasionally, and I'm talking about international trafficking, the type of people that generate the illegal content, underground content that you find on abusive porn sites and things like that. It used to be that you occasionally find a Muslim from the Philippines, a Muslim from Indonesia. Occasionally, you would find a Muslim even from Cambodia, a Muslim from Vietnam, a Muslim from Thailand. Today, wherever you turn, you find the statistics of Syrian women, Yemeni women, Libyan women, Sudanese women, Egyptian women, Tunisian women, and children. But the despots of Islam has created a world that is insular and uncaring, so that when you talk about it, Muslims are now at peace with the idea that you can be a good Muslim, you can be a great Muslim, if you limit your discourse to the hijab, but ignore the plight of Muslims who are trafficked and raped every night and day of their life. To accept the unacceptable, to make rational what is irrational. For Saudi Arabia to make $160 billion a year, but do absolutely next to nothing to liberate trafficked Muslim women and children. As long as they sponsor a resolution condemning Islamophobia. The same type of logic, the logic that is embraced and celebrated by the despots and tyrants of Islam. And mind you, the despots and tyrants of Islam are not just sitting in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia or in the United Arab Emirates. They are sitting in your local institutions. They are sitting in your Islamic centers and in your mosques. The very logic of this amoral Islam is reproduced and preserved every time your Islamic center or your local mosque or local Islamic organization exercises dictatorship and censorship. Every time it chooses to speak about what is morally neutral and ethically oblivious. Every time when the choice is made about what the khutbah is, and what to talk about, every time. They don't just sit in lands far away. They sit right next to you, right in your backyard. Look, recently, as now has become the custom, as now has become the immorality and the irrationality that we should never become accustomed to, and we should never get used to, more extrajudicial killings exercised by Israel against Palestinians. An Israeli death squad is captured on camera in a live video executing, putting to death, without trial, without charges, without anything, Palestinians. Omar Awadin, a 14-year-old riding a bicycle in front of his parents' store, is shot to death and killed on camera by an Israeli death squad. Look at the logic of irrationality and the logic of immorality. Israel, which claims to be a democracy, which never stops reminding the world that they are the only democracy in the Middle East. In international forums, in international bodies, Israel is a champion of gay rights because it says this is a matter of human dignity. Israel is a champion for the abolition of the death penalty. At the same time that they give eloquent lectures in the UN about how you must abolish the death penalty, they turn around and they put to death Palestinian children every day. I assure you, mark my words, that as Israel goes through the political crisis that it is going through right now, because Netanyahu wants to change the law to take away the independence of the Israeli Supreme Court, Israel is confronting a real political crisis. And the way Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir, who just published an article telling the world in the US, telling the Americans how Israel is a victim of racism and anti-Semitism, and how Israel is the only democracy in the world, and how Israel, anyone that says Israel is an apartheid state is an anti-Semite. These same people, mark my words, are going to solve the political crisis that they confront by launching a major assault against Palestinians in Ramadan. We will again witness unrelenting bloodletting of Palestinians in Ramadan, because Netanyahu has always solved his political problems by attacking and killing Palestinians. We just, as Muslims, have a very poor memory. We don't study, we don't read, we don't do our homework. Now, at the same time that any rational person can read what is obvious, the United Arab Emirates signs a major commercial deal with Israeli firms, pictured happily together. For the first time in the meeting of the Muslim World League, a Jewish representative, Rabbi Jackie Tabak, is welcomed in the meeting of the Muslim World League and met warmly and kindly. But what that rabbi said is what gave me pause, and what is again amazingly telling. While Sheikh al-Isa, as usual, with his typical buffoonery and typical intellectual cluelessness, babbled words of welcome and greetings of celebrations, when the rabbi was asked what were the barriers to interfaith dialogue, the response of the rabbi was very informative. He said, "There is, of course, an elephant in the room." The rabbi knows the elephant in the room. But Sheikh Isa, the servant and slave of despots, doesn't notice the elephant in the room. Because his despot, his tyrant, doesn't want him and doesn't allow him to notice the elephant in the room. The rabbi, however, said, there is, of course, the elephant in the room, the Israel-Palestine situation. But then he continues, political debates, however, are often used to reinterpret anti-Semitic tropes. What is he saying? He's saying there is an elephant in the room, the Israel-Palestine issue, the same elephant that the servants of tyranny don't notice. But he underscores the Israeli position that when you criticize Israel for its inhumane policies and its consistent violation of the rules of ethics and morality, you are reinterpreting and recirculating anti-Semitic tropes. So in other words, yes, I am here with you Muslims. Yes, you fumbled over yourselves to welcome me. Yes, I am very happy that you opened your door. But I am conceding nothing and giving you nothing. I am not meeting you halfway or partway or anyway. If you criticize what we do to Palestinians, you're anti-Semites. Of course, although Arabs are Semites themselves, but it doesn't matter. This is the ethics and morality of tyranny. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us repeatedly not to worship Taghut. In fact, Hazrat Allah repeatedly in Surah Ali Imran and Surah An-Nisa repeatedly told us, beware of those who are abadat Taghut, those who worship no principle, embrace no ethic, don't engage in any moral thinking. In fact, are not interested in moral thinking. The only thing they're interested in is to be in the service of tyrannical power. Irrational, amoral power. Power for the sake of power. Abadat al-Taghut. Hasn't Allah warned us that if you worship anyone but Allah, that this is precisely will become your state? And make no mistake, while the rabbi, who is all his dignity intact, blesses Muslims with his presence in the meeting of the Muslim World League, reaffirms what he sees as their rightful position. You criticize us for the apartheid we inflict upon Palestinians, we call you a bunch of racists and anti-Semites, and that's it. And we will compromise nothing, hold back nothing, concede nothing when it comes to killing whoever we want, stealing whatever land we want, imprisoning whoever we want, torturing whoever we want. While you Muslims, we know you're nothing but parrots, worshiping your tyrannical, ignorant rulers. One final note. Once again, Allah shows us the enormous power when those people who have capital and money have also an ideological vision. It is now well known that behind Netanyahu's new right-wing power in Israel, behind the attempt to reformulate the rules of the game in Israel from a state, an apartheid state that targets Palestinians, to a state that even discriminates against leftist Jews and Jews who are not as hawkish and as right-wing. It is now well known that all of this was because there were two American millionaires, Arthur Danzig and Jeffrey Yass, who funded a think tank called the Call It Policy Forum. And that think tank is what propelled the entire Netanyahu movement recently, and is behind the entire project for the completion of the colonization of Palestine, for an aggressive policy of completing the stealing of Palestinian territory and Palestinian lands, and also the silencing of the democracy, at least a democracy for Jews in Israel. It is remarkable, time and time again, that although we clearly know as Muslims that Islamophobia has become a world phenomenon, although we've clearly seen what Islamophobia has done in Bosnia, what Islamophobia has done in Burma, what Islamophobia has done in Kashmir, what Islamophobia has done in China, what Islamophobia continues to do in Europe and the US and Australia and Canada, although it is beyond even dispute that Islamophobia has become a hegemonic power in the world. And even although we know that what allowed Islamophobia to become what it is that there are enough people in this world who are willing to fund such a malignant and systematic and powerful worldwide movement. And although we know that the tyrants of Islam have adopted an entirely irrational and ineffective philosophy in response to Islamophobia, the solution is to educate people about Islam. Really? Islamophobia is about education? You really think that the response to Islamophobia is to just explain things so that Daniel Pipes will finally see the light? These people don't realize that Daniel Pipes is far more educated than 100 of them. Although we know all of that, and although we've seen what capital can do for Hindu nationalism, and what capital can do for organizations like the Colette Policy Forum. As we get ready to meet Ramadan, to do our prayers and supplications and worship and dua in Ramadan, once again, where are the Muslim rich? Where are the Muslim wealthy? They are still concerned about whether tyrants approve of the way they spend their money or not. They still want to play it safe. They want to fund conferences so that the youth can come together and talk about rhetoric, dogma, but never to fund anything serious or anything ethical or anything active. I honestly do not know how these Muslim millionaires who sit on their deposits of money or who spend their money on projects that are ineffective and are ghetto prone. They are investments in Muslim ghettos for the sake of Muslim ghettos, for the perpetuation of Muslim ghettos, moral ghettos, ethical ghettos. I really do not know how these Muslims hope to have their fasting accepted or their dua accepted. And if this is their last Ramadan, how do they imagine that they have a prayer of ever being blessed or forgiven or accepted in Jannah? I really don't know. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم واسأل الله يستجب لكم إني داع فأمنوا. اللهم اغفر لنا، اللهم ارحمنا، اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا علي عظيم. Allah forgive us our sins. Allah bless us and have mercy upon us. Allah guide us to a better path, to a better road, to serving you. Allah empower us to stand against the immorality of tyranny and despotism on طاغوت يا رب العالمين. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأقم الصلاة.